Watch Jose Fernandez's face when that question lands. That's not the expression of a coach with answers. That's a man watching his defensive scheme get exposed on national television for the third straight game. The Dallas Wings just gave up 98 points to Indiana after holding them to 35 in the first half. Let that sink in. 63 points in 2 quarters. And when the reporter asks about Audark's defense and those backdoor cuts, Fernandez can barely get the words out. He's talking about backside help and anticipation, but what he's really saying is simpler: we got embarrassed. The Wings came into this matchup already reeling. Losses to Seattle, losses to teams they should have handled. Paige Bueckers had to fly back to Minnesota for corporate obligations while her team was falling apart. And now here they are, getting torched by Caitlin Clark for 29 points and watching Kelsey Mitchell carve up their defense like it wasn't even there. Fernandez mentions they're getting thrown around too easy, and he's not wrong. Look at the rebounding numbers. Nalissa Smith grabbed 7 boards. Aaliyah Boston pulled down 10. For the Fever's bigs, this was target practice. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. The reporter from Ballers magazine asks about adjustments heading into Golden State, and Fernandez pivots immediately to talking about how different that matchup will be. He's talking about Golden State's defensive pressure, their trapping schemes, how physical they get. But notice what he's not addressing. He's not explaining how Dallas fixes what just broke against Indiana. He's already moved on to the next game because this one is too painful to dissect any further. And that fourth quarter collapse he mentions, that wasn't just poor execution, that was a complete systematic failure. The Wings were answering baskets, staying competitive through 3 quarters, and then Indiana flipped a switch. 29 points in the third quarter became an avalanche in the fourth. Fernandez keeps circling back to rim protection and physicality, and those are real issues, but they're symptoms of a bigger problem. This team doesn't have an identity on defense anymore. Last season, under their previous coach, Latricia Trammell, they had structure, they had accountability. Now they're getting backdoored on basic cuts that high school teams would recognize. That pause right there, that long, awkward silence when the reporter asks about Aqua Career's contribution. Fernandez heard the question, he understood it, but his brain just stopped processing for a second because he's got nothing positive to say that won't sound like desperate spin. So he defaults to the safest possible answer. She'll get an opportunity in Golden State to rebound, defend, and protect the basket. Translation: she didn't do any of those things tonight, and we're hoping a fresh start against a different opponent will somehow fix it. This is what happens when a team loses confidence in its defensive principles. Fernandez can draw up all the schemes he wants, but if players aren't communicating on backside rotations, if they're ball watching instead of helping, if they're getting bodied on the glass by smaller lineups, then the X's and O's don't matter. Indiana ran the same backdoor cut 4 different times in that fourth quarter, and Dallas fell for it every single time. That's not a talent issue, that's a preparation and focus issue. And when your head coach is sitting in a press conference struggling to articulate what went wrong, that tells you the problems run deeper than one bad quarter. Now listen to Paige Bueckers. Same press conference, completely different energy. She's composed, she's diplomatic, she's giving the media exactly what they want to hear about enjoying the moment and being part of the movement. But watch her body language. She's exhausted. Not just physically from the game, but mentally from carrying this team's offensive load while watching the defense crumble behind her. The reporter asks about playing in a sold-out arena in Indiana, about what her younger self would think, and Paige gives a textbook answer about dreams coming true. But here's the context that makes this response so hollow. She just scored efficiently, ran the offense exactly how Fernandez drew it up, got the ball to her teammates in positions to succeed, and still lost by double digits because Indiana scored at will in the fourth quarter. This is the third time in recent weeks that Paige has done everything asked of her individually, while the team result has been a loss. And then the question about Awak Kayer's offensive chemistry. Paige lights up a little bit here because finally someone's asking about something that actually worked. She talks about Kayer's instincts, her ability to shoot the 3 and get to the paint, her length creating opportunities. Those are real positives. But notice what Paige doesn't mention, defense, because Kayer, like the rest of this Dallas roster, was getting torched on that end. You can have all the offensive chemistry in the world, but if you're giving up 63 points and a half, you're going home with a loss. Arika Ogunbowale jumps in here, and her answer is the most honest thing anyone from Dallas has said all night. A lot of backdoor layups, weren't helping each other, hugged up on our man on the weak side. She's calling out the exact defensive breakdowns that cost them the game, and she's not sugarcoating it. When you've got elite guards like Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell attacking you, you cannot leave your teammates on an island. But that's exactly what Dallas did, possession after possession. Arika mentions how they left Paige to guard Clark one-on-one, left Kelsey to handle Mitchell in isolation, and the rest of the team just stood around watching. That's not WNBA level defense, that's pickup basketball defense. And the scary part? Arika knows it, Paige knows it, Fernandez knows it, and they still couldn't fix it in real time during the game. No timeout adjustment worked. No substitution pattern changed the momentum. Indiana recognized the weakness and attacked it relentlessly. Think about what this means for Dallas moving forward. They've got Golden State next, a team that runs even more complex offensive actions than Indiana. If they couldn't handle basic backdoor cuts against the Fever, how are they going to deal with the Valkyries' motion offense and screening actions? Arika's honesty in this moment is refreshing, but it's also alarming because it reveals that this team knows exactly what's wrong and still can't execute the solution. And here's where the excuses stop. The reporter asks about being down 3 players, clearly setting up an easy out for Dallas to blame the loss on roster availability. But both Paige and Arika shut that down immediately. They fought for 3 quarters, they competed. And then in the 4th quarter, Caitlin Clark laid it on them, and that's unacceptable regardless of who's available or who's injured. This is actually the most encouraging part of the entire press conference, because it shows these players aren't interested in moral victories or participation trophies. Arika explicitly says being down people is not an excuse, that they have a deep roster with good players coming off the bench. She's holding the team accountable to a standard that says we should win this game even shorthanded. The fact that they didn't is a failure, period. But here's the tension. If the players are holding themselves to that standard and still coming up short, what does that say about the coaching? Fernandez couldn't make the defensive adjustments needed to stop Indiana's 4th quarter run. He couldn't find a rotation that protected the rim. He couldn't get his team to execute the basic help principles that Arika is describing in this press conference. At some point, the responsibility falls on the coaching staff to put players in position to succeed, and tonight that didn't happen. Let's go back to the beginning of this whole saga, because the frustration we just witnessed in that press conference didn't start with the Indiana loss. It's been building for weeks. The commentator here is laying out the full context. Losses to the Wings, losses to Seattle, losses to teams Dallas should be beating. Paige Bueckers flying back to Minnesota for corporate obligations while the team is struggling. The whole operation feels disjointed, like everyone's pulling in different directions instead of rowing together. And then there's the comparison to last season's coaching staff. Latricia Trammell had this team playing structured, disciplined basketball. They weren't the most talented roster in the league, but they maximized what they had. Now under Fernandez, with arguably more talent on paper, they're regressing. Arika Ogunbowale looks hesitant, almost hiding in the offense according to the commentator's observation. That's alarming for a player of her caliber and experience. The defensive numbers tell the story. Caitlin Clark dropped 29, Kelsey Mitchell was unconscious, Lexi Hull was getting open looks, Nalissa Smith and Aaliyah Boston were feasting on the glass. The commentator mentions that earlier matchups between these teams were closer, more defensive-minded games where Dallas actually had success slowing down Indiana's offense. But this game, this was a clinic. Indiana figured out Dallas's defensive weaknesses and exploited them systematically. What's particularly damning is the rebounding disparity. Nalissa Smith with 7 rebounds, Aaliyah Boston with 10, Lexi Hull with 2, even Caitlin Clark grabbed 3 boards. Meanwhile, Dallas is getting pushed around in the paint, losing 50 to 50 balls, giving up second chance opportunities. Fernandez mentioned in his press conference that they get thrown around too easily, and the box score proves it. When you're getting out-rebounded and out-hustled by a team that's also out-executing you offensively, you're in serious trouble. The commentator's observation about potentially needing to go to Cancun for fresh air is funny, but it's also kind of true. This Dallas team needs a reset. They need to find their identity, figure out what kind of defensive team they want to be, and commit to it. Right now, they're caught between styles. They're not physical enough to bang with teams in the paint, but they're not quick enough to switch everything on the perimeter either. That's a recipe for getting exploited by good offensive teams, and Indiana is exactly that. Here's what makes this situation so precarious for Dallas. The WNBA season is unforgiving. There's no time for a prolonged rebuild or a 10-game stretch to figure things out. Every loss matters for playoff positioning, and Dallas is currently watching teams they should be beating pull ahead of them in the standings. The Wings have the talent to be a playoff team, maybe even a dangerous playoff team if everything clicks. But talent doesn't matter if you can't execute basic defensive rotations. And let's talk about Paige Bueckers specifically, because her situation is fascinating. She's one of the most hyped prospects in recent WNBA history, came into the league with enormous expectations, and she's actually living up to most of them individually. Her offensive game is polished, she makes smart decisions with the ball, she's a willing passer who can also score when needed. But she's learning the harsh reality that individual excellence doesn't always translate to team success, especially when your defense is giving up 63 points in a half. The corporate obligations pulling her away from the team mid-season also highlight the unique challenges WNBA players face. These athletes are building their brands, fulfilling sponsorship commitments, trying to maximize their earning potential in a league that still doesn't pay anywhere near NBA salaries. But those obligations create distractions and take time away from team building and chemistry development. It's not Paige's fault that she had to fly to Minnesota, but it's also not ideal timing when your team is spiraling. Now Dallas has to travel to face Golden State, a team that presents completely different challenges. The Valkyries play with pace, they move the ball, they run complex actions that require constant communication and awareness. If Dallas couldn't handle Indiana's straightforward backdoor cuts, how are they going to deal with Golden State's sophisticated offensive system? Fernandez mentioned in the press conference that Golden State gets up in you defensively. They trap, they pressure the ball. That means Paige and Arik are going to have to work twice as hard just to get into their offensive sets. The rebounding issue is going to be even more critical against Golden State. The Valkyries crash the offensive glass hard. They run in transition off missed shots. They create chaos with their energy and athleticism. Dallas is already struggling to box out and secure defensive rebounds against teams like Indiana. Against Golden State's relentless attack on the glass, they could get absolutely buried if they don't fix their fundamentals immediately. What's the path forward for this Dallas team? First, they need to simplify their defensive scheme. Stop trying to be multiple things and commit to one identity. If you're going to switch everything and live with the mismatches. If you're going to play drop coverage, commit to it and make sure your guards fight over screens. The worst thing you can do is be indecisive, and right now Dallas looks indecisive on every single possession. Second, they need to get Arik Ogunbowale going offensively. She's too talented to be passive, too experienced to be hiding in the offense. Whether that's a coaching issue or a confidence issue, it needs to be addressed immediately. When Arik is aggressive and attacking, she's one of the most dangerous scorers in the league. When she's deferring and settling for spot-up threes, Dallas becomes too predictable and too easy to guard. Third, the rebounding effort has to improve. That's not a scheme thing, that's not a talent thing, that's a want-to thing. You either commit to boxing out and pursuing every rebound like it's a loose ball, or you accept that you're going to get dominated on the glass. There's no middle ground. Dallas has the size with players like Awak and their other bigs, but size doesn't matter if you're not putting a body on someone and going after the basketball. So where does this leave us? Dallas is at a crossroads. They can either figure out their defensive identity in the next couple of games and salvage their season, or they can continue down this path of inconsistency and watch their playoff hopes slip away. The talent is there, the pieces are in place, but talent without execution is just potential, and potential doesn't win games in the WNBA. The press conference we just watched revealed a team that knows exactly what's wrong but hasn't figured out how to fix it. Fernandez knows they're getting thrown around. Arik knows they're not helping each other. Paige knows the defensive breakdowns are killing them, but knowing the problem and solving the problem are two very different things. Dallas needs to find answers fast because the schedule doesn't get easier, and teams like Indiana and Golden State aren't going to slow down and wait for the Wings to figure it out. If you're a Dallas fan, this has to be frustrating to watch. If you're a Paige Bueckers fan who followed her from college, you're probably wondering how a player this talented can be stuck on a team that can't get out of its own way defensively. And if you're just a WNBA fan who appreciates good basketball, you're watching a team with playoff potential wasted on fundamental breakdowns that should have been fixed in training camp. The question now is whether Jose Fernandez can make the necessary adjustments, whether this roster can buy into a defensive identity and execute it consistently, and whether Dallas can turn this season around before it's too late. Because right now, they're trending in the wrong direction, and the teams ahead of them in the standings aren't slowing down. What do you think Dallas needs to do to fix this? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's see if the Wings can figure it out before their season completely falls apart.